Hello, everyone, and welcome to our space today on the Worldcoin launch and beyond. We've got a couple of really exciting folks to talk with today. We have Alex, the CEO of Tools for Humanity, and Tiago, who's head of product. I'm Stephen Smith. I'm the head of protocol, so deal with everything crypto blockchain related. So we'll get started here in just a second. Quick housekeeping note. There's probably going to be a lot of questions today. So please just enter those in the thread associated with the tweet, and we'll get to as many of those as we possibly can, and try to save some time for those at the end. I'd like to just jump in first with congratulations for everyone involved in the project, but especially to Alex and a number of the founding team. You've been building the project for several years now. Finally, the launch on July 24th. How does it feel, and what does it mean to, kind of be at the end of the beginning, so to speak, and to get the project launched?
Thank you. So first of all, great to be here. I think it's the first time in a long while that I'm here on Twitter Spaces. It has been a very busy few months. But yeah, it feels incredible. I mean, I'm back in this small town in Germany called Erlangen, where we, because of COVID, had to start working on Worldcoin in a super small office. And it is crazy that 3 years ago, it was like less than 10 people sitting here, and we started working on Worldcoin, built the early prototypes, and now we are at 1.7 million active users in the wallet. Orbs are all over the place, and we're growing quickly. So it really feels like yesterday that Sam and Max pitched me Worldcoin, and we started working on that. So it's been intense 3 years, but very rewarding as well.
Very good. I know I've been involved in the project for, relatively speaking, an incredibly small amount of time compared to a number of folks, you and Tiago included. But it's super exciting to have the launch behind us. So, in looking at a number of people have been following WorldCoin for quite a while, basically since it launched. And there's always been talk about UBI, or universal basic income, and crypto and identity as it relates to what is the project all about, WorldCoin's ambitions. So how do all those things intersect? How do you see those things actually intersecting? Are some things higher priority than others? Or just, yeah, could you elaborate on that a bit?
For sure. The initial pitch that actually back then I heard it myself, because back then I was interviewing essentially for Worldcoin, because Sam and Max and a couple other people already worked on it for 6 months. And the initial pitch actually still holds true. The initial pitch is, if you solve proof of personhood, you are able to launch a token. You can align all incentives to grow a really large network relatively quickly. A large network that is built on top of proof of personhood, which is something that does not exist right now on the internet, and financial primitives, if it gets to a billion people scale, will be incredibly transformative and will accelerate many things that people in crypto are excited about. And how UBI and all those things fit into that is just that, well, we really believe that AGI is coming, and it's coming relatively quickly, and that will transform many things in our society. But it definitely will transform how our economy works. And I think a very simple mental model around UBI is just that in a world in which the economic productivity increases quite drastically, there will be a mechanism to actually reallocate these resources to many, many people across the world. And Worldcoin is not that itself, but it really is the infrastructure that can enable those things over the long term. Of course, right now there's a continuous Worldcoin airdrop and all those things, but I think the overall vision is much, much bigger, and we are still super early. Does it make sense?
Absolutely. And I think one of the keys is sometimes we get caught up in some very in-depth technical explanations of how the orb works.
Yep.
And the different architectures and things like that. But zooming out a little bit, those are the fundamental drivers and mission of the project that you just articulated. So I think it's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal summary, and definitely one everyone can relate to. So speaking of the launch, so I've got a launch timer, like a lot of us do. So we launched 18 days and almost 10 hours ago now. So Tiago, any data you can share with us in terms of how the launch went, how it was received, or anything that might be interesting to people listening in?
Yeah, for sure. It's been bonkers, right? It's been a crazy 2.5 weeks. It's obviously we were expecting people to be excited about this, but I would say just like honestly speaking, around all around, it has like far exceeded our expectations. I can share a few numbers. Generally speaking, we saw a ton of people downloading World App and creating accounts. More than 1.1 million people in the past 2.5 weeks have done that, which is just like crazy to think about for a crypto product. You have like so many people and it's going so mainstream. But it's not just like 1.1 million people in one place or in a handful of countries. I think it was something like 190 countries where people signed up. There's a really cool map that I think the Worldcoin account has tweeted where you can see all of these, a time lapse of all of these signups happening. And it's just super cool to see that this comes out to, I think, something like 430,000 accounts created per week. So that's been like really cool to see. But even more than people signing up, what's been great is just seeing people actually use the thing, right? So in the past 30 days, 1.7 million people have used the app. We had a time earlier this week where actually for an hour we have almost 120,000 people online on the app at the same time. So just the amount of like time and intensity that people are using the app is just like far what we expected, and at times we've been over capacity. And thank you everyone who's just like bearing with us. Like at times there's like literally no more people feeding the app, so we're constantly upgrading every part of the infrastructure to be able to hold more people in the app at any given time. So if you ever see messages like that, just please try it in a few minutes. But for the most part, it's gone great. It's gone super smooth. The other really tricky thing about launch is that it's not just an app, right? You have everything that's happening on chain and the transactions. And since launch, the infrastructure has had to process more than 4.5 million transactions, which is, again, it's just like unheard of, not just for us, but like for any project. And so huge shout out to Optimism and that entire community, which like the network has been performing great. We moved over to Optimism a few days before launch, and so they didn't really get to prepare much, but they've been holding up like champs. So it's been really cool. Generally, basically every second, more than one person signed up during the past few weeks. And so it's just been really cool. But as you're saying, this is the end of the beginning, and now we have to take this to a lot more people. So it should be a fun couple of months and years ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah. So another shout out for me to Optimism and the team there and to their infrastructure. We single-handedly, and apologies to everyone else trying to run there, we single-handedly pushed the fee market up on Optimism during the launch, just from the amount of activity that we had. But yeah, everything just performed super well there. So in addition to the accounts being created, obviously the orb is central to the, orb sign up process, if you will. And we signed up through the orbs, verified a new human every 7.6 seconds, in addition to a new account being created roughly every second. So just a great push and a lot of activity. So if we back up a little bit, we talked about launch and that success, but if we back up a little bit, what was it? And this is the question again for Tiago and Alex to a degree as well. In the time leading up to launch, just right before, so much planning, so much was going in, so much to get done in the tech stack. As Tiago mentioned, we migrated over to Optimism a few weeks before we went live. But Tiago, what was it like getting ready for the launch and then actually launching such a project that so many people were interested in?
It was very intense. I'm not going to lie. It was probably the hardest that the entire team has worked on in their entire lives. And it's not like that stopped at launch because the people just keep signing up and signing up. But it was really cool. Just getting all of the final pieces together to be able to launch like the system. It's a really big step coming out of beta across the board. And so there was a lot of really important upgrades, right? Making the World ID SDK available for any dev that wants to sign up, migrating the app to Optimism. There was just many upgrades across the board that we knew were very important for this transition out of beta and to launch. But in many ways, there's still years and years ahead of things to build. But it was very cool. More than anything, the thing that was super energizing for us, honestly, was just seeing people around the world looking for orbs, tweeting, how can I find an orb? The lines where just orbs were at capacity. It's just really cool to see people in so many places excited about it. And that's really what has kept the team going for the past few weeks in such an intense period.
Yeah. How about you, Alex? Anything to add? Like the run up to launch and some of the last things we encountered there and
I mean, it was a 3-year run up to launch.
Right.
But focusing on the last couple months, it really was like the usual situation where the last whatever, like the last 10% take as long as the prior 80 or something. So you have this weird distribution that tweaking all the details and getting everything right takes just much longer than you think. And that is clearly what I think hit all of us. It was very intense. We spent many nights in the office to get this shipped and get it done, but I don't think that is a particular surprise. I'm trying to see if there's something. Oh, I think like actually one interesting analogy that people might not be aware of, but was I think at least very cool for the TVH team here is right before launch, we wanted to quickly ramp up orb distribution. So like for everyone that is maybe new to this, we were still very early. We were at 270, I think, as of today, 270 orbs around the world. And there's a couple big cities, essentially, we just wanted to be present in for the period right after launch. And so we actually sent like a large portion of the team around the world. And large portion of the team is still like in many cities with orbs to just be available and actually get people signed up there. And I think this was an incredible experience, both for the team, but then also there were some cities in there that completely blew up in a way we did not expect it to happen. I think Tokyo is, for example, is like one example where previously before launch, we did not operate in Tokyo, and we sent team members into Tokyo at least with 2 or 3 orbs, and it completely blew up. We had lines of hundreds and hundreds of people in kind of center Tokyo waiting to get verified. And I think that was my personal highlight, to be honest.
All right, very good. No, it was phenomenal. And by the way, going back to something Tiago said, just super proud of the team. I got to work, fortunately, across the different engineering teams in the run up to launch, and just super proud of all the great hard work. Shifting gears a bit, obviously with as much attention and as much activity as we've had, there's always an increase in questions, the legitimate questions people have or concerns they might bring up. It could be about the project or biometric data in general. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's misinformation that comes up as opposed to research questions or whatever. So what are some of the more common misconceptions that you're hearing about or reading about? It's a question both for Alex and Tiago.
Sure. Let me maybe start with a quick 101 on what are all the things we had to build and why. So essentially, we launched with 3 things. We launched with World ID, which is an identity protocol that is built on top of a biometric verification device that is called the Orb. We'll go on that purpose for a second. Then the second one was the World app, which is essentially the first app and the first wallet that connected to the Worldcoin protocol, which there will be many others going forward. And then the Worldcoin token, which is a cryptocurrency, a digital currency. And those 3 things together create a very important and powerful flywheel, because essentially token aligns all incentives around growth. The Orb allows to do proof of unique humanness, which is something that doesn't exist right now on the internet. And the World app is just the app that gets users onboarded immediately. And so to the misconceptions and the general questions, like why the Orb in the first place, I think is a question we have answered many times. But essentially, to solve identity on the internet or proof of unique humanness on the internet, which is actually one level below that, you cannot use consumer phones for a lot of different reasons. One is security. The second one is essentially that you cannot solve uniqueness with face or fingerprint because it just doesn't have enough information. And you do not want to rely on governments in any form because they might be very functional in some places, but in others they're not. And then essentially you end up with a technology that is not inclusive. So essentially, what does not rely on consumer devices, what does not rely on governments, and then you end up with, okay, you have to build your own hardware device, which was for us a very painful insight in the beginning, something we really did not want to do because it's very expensive. We have been very aware that this is going to sound scary initially, and it's very operationally challenging and hard to actually roll this out. However, it was the only solution for the problem, so we did it, and the Orb essentially does 2 things. First, it checks for liveness. So whatever is in front of the device is an actual human being, and no one actually tries to attack the device or try to fraud the device with displays or more sophisticated attacks. And then second, it checks for uniqueness of the user. So if I want to verify, the Orb does liveness checks first. Second, takes a picture of my eye, calculates a unique code out of this, and compares that against everyone else. However, it does it through zero knowledge proofs. And so you, as a user, you actually stay anonymous. And so as counterintuitive as it sounds, this is much more privacy preserving than anything else you usually use, like your Facebook login or your Google login. So that gets me to the first thing, is like Worldcoin being a privacy nightmare. No, it's not. It really is just not. And I think it's very well documented that it's not. The second misconception here is Worldcoin stores data or wants to sell data. Also, this is just not true. And in fact, that's the last thing we would want to do. By default, there's no data stored, no biometric data stored if you sign up with an orb. There have been old screenshots circulating from the early beta of the project that have been 2 years old. And it was actually quite frustrating to see how many people took that way too serious, but that is just not what the project does. So I think that's a good start. Is there anything you want me to go deeper on, Stephen or Tiago?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great start. And so I would just make a general comment, is that we actually welcome people leaning in, digging into the project, pointing out where we could document things better or do things better. We love that kind of feedback. It just helps the project grow. So in general, that. And then Alex, I don't know if you want to touch on like regulatory compliance and some of the things we're seeing around that at the moment.
Sure. Given the volume, given the attention and kind of the number of signups in the app, the number of verifications of an orb, it obviously is not a surprise that there is a lot of regulatory bodies that had questions about the project. This was to be expected. Within the launch week, I think there was parts of the world where a significant percentage, or like almost 1% of a whole country, for example, signed up to World App. That is nothing that usually happens. We have been on top of the App Store in multiple countries, not within finance, but within all categories. And we had lines of literally thousands of people in some locations. So all of those things, of course, create a lot of attention in mainstream press and a lot of distribution. And of course, we have a lot of regulatory bodies reaching out to us and having questions, but that's okay. And of course, we will work with everyone to answer their questions. And that's pretty much where we are. I think there's not much more to say here.
Yeah, and this is not new, right?
No.
Like, we've been working with regulators for like many years now. Usually every time we go into a market, we talk with them. So it's like super normal for them to ask what's up when there's so much attention on the project. We've been working with them for a while and we'll continue doing so. And usually they're also surprised by how private things are and once they actually are able to understand the project.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And we're very proactive about that, right? We don't blindly go in, as Tiago said, into a different geography or whatever. And we work proactively, and we have a team that focuses on that who do an excellent job. And the key, just like we mentioned early on, regulators should ask questions and do their due diligence, just like anyone interested in the project should do. And we encourage that for sure. So it only helps us improve the project, which is what we're after. So continuing on a little bit, Tiago, did you want to talk about, there was some things about World ID is a permissionless protocol, which means it can be used by anyone. You don't need to be approved or whitelisted by us to use it. And there was the last thing we'll touch on regarding misconceptions, but there was some talk about governments using World ID, for example, like taken out of context. Tiago, do you want to just touch on that one briefly and then we'll move on?
Yeah, totally. I think you said it, like World ID is an open system that anyone can use, like the internet, right? No one gets to decide who uses the internet and who doesn't. You can just use it. And so I think there was at some point a question somewhere about, hey, can governments use World ID? And we said, sure, they just like any other developer can use World ID. And I think there might have been people might have misunderstood that means that data gets shared with governments or they have special permissions. But no, all that means is that just like any random 15-year-old hacker or any startup can integrate with World ID, governments can also choose to integrate with the World ID protocol. Now, when they do that, they're subject to the same rules as everyone, right? Because they're literally hard-coded onto the system. World IDs always live on people's phones, right? And people always have to initiate a verification, and any type of authorization that you would do to sign into a website, they always go through the same zero knowledge proofs and whatnot. And we're super excited about the idea of governments or nonprofits or startups using World ID to supplement anything else they do. But it's not like governments or any other companies have special permissions over World ID or access to any data. that's just like simply not possible.
Oh, totally agree. Yeah. So just again, I guess to wrap this part up, one thing I'd like to point out is we try to be very transparent about how we approach privacy. So there's a great privacy fact FAQ on our website, worldcoin.org/blog. And then we also recently, it's also on the blog, published 2 independent audit results from 2 third-party companies, Least Authority, which has a focus on privacy, and Nethermind, who's one of their many things they do is smart contract audits. So all that's out there. We encourage people to take a look at all those things. And if there's any questions that result from that, just please let us know. So if we, I guess, shift gears a bit and we look ahead, we've talked about the history of the project. We talked about the launch. We've talked about leading up to the launch. And, we kind of look ahead. What do we see? And this is just an open question for both Tiago and Alex. And I've got a couple of thoughts or comments to chime in with. But what are some of the main things? Like, what's next? It's the beginning or the end of the beginning, as we said. So what's next? What's up?
So I will start and then Tiago can take the rest. But essentially, there's no big surprises here. I think the first big one is just increasing the scale of the project drastically, right? So we're now at 270 orbs. We are in many of the major cities of the world. But of course, this needs to ramp up. We need to have much wider distribution. It needs to be much easier for people to sign up everywhere. So get this number up quickly, which is a major, both technological, but mostly operational challenge. That's 1. 2, there's a lot of product and engineering things that we just want to ship. And both on the WorldID side and the World App side, those 2 products can still drastically improve. We're still early. And I think Tiago can actually take some of these and go deeper on it. And then 3 is, I think, towards the end of the year, and maybe in Q1, we will start working much more on actual major integrations, people that actually can use the whole technology stack to build things on top. Before, we are much wider distributed. This doesn't make much sense, but in a couple months, it will make a lot of sense, and it's going to happen. So that's my high-level overview. There's, of course, many other things that will happen, especially within TFH. The team has to grow. We have to rearrange things and whatever. So there's a lot of internal things, of course, but that's my quick summary.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, right? I can get a bit more specific on the World App side of things. Obviously, continuing to expand coverage as possible. We know on and off ramps, so the ability to deposit and withdraw funds from World App is the easier we can make that, the happier everyone will be. And so we're constantly working a ton to in every country around the world, make it as easy as possible to deposit and withdraw money. Also, as we deploy orbs in a lot more cities, we are building tools that just make it super easy for people to visit those orbs, right? So we have recently released the ability to find orbs near you. And right now what we're rolling out is the ability to schedule appointments, right? Because sometimes you show up to an orb, it turns out there's a huge line, or it turns out they weren't operating that day. And now, starting now in a lot of markets, we're rolling out the ability for you to say, I want to go at 12:15 on Thursday. And you know that the orb will be there ready for you without having to do a line. So that's something that we're super excited about. There's a bunch of other things on World App that probably not too much of a point to go into, just generally continuing to improve recovery and make things as easy as possible for people. On the World ID side of things, as Alex was saying, right, there's just the technology needs to continue maturing. We will ship the ability to recover lost World IDs pretty soon. So that's a very popular request. So you'll be able to go back to an orb and recover a World ID if you, for whatever reason, lost it. And so just generally between now and the end of the year, I would say the entire system and ecosystem needs to continue to mature and to be able to support the growing scale, because hopefully things will grow quite a bit over the coming months.
Oh, and one more thing on the engineering front, which I think is actually a good time to call this out, is Vitalik on launch day published a blog post about a biometric proof of person node and covered actually, I think, a lot of Worldcoin quite extensively. And one of the more surprising things is still that people thought this was like a negative blog post, or some people at least thought that. I don't think it was. And we spent quite some time with Vitalik giving feedback on it and working on it better. Just read it yourself. But why I'm saying read it yourself, because I think many of the things that have to be implemented, have to be been built, are mentioned in there. And I really do agree with that. So that's actually, I think, a very good start for you to just go deeper into the tech if you want. But there's re-authentication, a lot of recovery primitives that have to be built, a lot of open questions still that we will be quite public about and transparent about. Then, of course, there's the white paper, which is, to be fair, in our case, 150 pages long and constantly actually getting longer and more detailed. It really is like a running documentation of the project. But I think that's the other important call out. If you're interested in technology, if you're interested to be on the cutting edge of both crypto topics, but then also a lot of deep learning, AI stuff, operational stuff, consider joining us and working with us here.
Nope, I totally agree. So quick housekeeping note, we are going to have time. We've got a few questions in. We're going to get to those. But if you do have questions, please get those in now so we can get them teed up. The only thing I would add to what's already been covered by Alex and Tiago in terms of looking ahead, it's consistent with that theme of scale. As I mentioned early on, and we talked about at launch, just the numbers we were seeing and the load we were generating, transactional volume. We're going to be on the app stack, if you will, app backend and protocol, essentially dealing with a lot of scalability type enhancements that we've been working on for a while, just to keep pace with the load that we're anticipating. So very much looking forward to that. We started some of these sometime back and have really good ideas about how to handle them going forward. With that, I will shift over and look at a couple of questions. First question is, we talked a little bit about this, but why do you need orbs to verify?
I think we covered it here in the space, but the quick summary is the hardest problem about identity that usually only governments are solving is the problem of deduplication. So how do you ensure that every person is only able to have one account? And that is, in the crypto space, people call it Sybil resistance, or general computer science actually would be solved through that. But it actually has much, much wider implications. And deduplication is a really, really hard problem because all the things that you usually use in your daily life, let's say your iPhone does not do that. Your iPhone and Face ID, what it does is it checks that you're the same person again. So it does a one-to-one comparison. So I'm still Alex, and I try to log into my phone, discovers, okay, this is actually again Alex, and he wants to use his phone. And that's pretty easy to solve because, for example, it's really hard for me to look exactly like Steven. But to solve deduplication, we need to check that I'm unique in a global database of users. And within the Worldcoin use case, of course, it has to be completely privacy preserving and anonymous, which makes it even harder. And that's a much harder problem because now it's not a one-to-one comparison, but it is a one to, let's say, 1 billion people. And phones are not able to do that. We do not want to rely on government identities for a lot of different reasons. They're not inclusive. They might not work in many countries. And so you fundamentally need to build a custom device for that. And that is what the orb is. And the orb is really, I think, at this point, the only open source alternative that we have to a lot of things that might have quite bad implications, for example, using government identities to solve the same problem. So that's why we need the orb. I think the orb is a quite sophisticated solution to one of the most important problems on the internet that once it is at scale, will have many other implications.
Right. Nope. Excellent answer. And I'd also point out, again, we refer to our blogs and the white paper, which, by the way, is located at whitepaper.worldcoin.org. And it is very comprehensive if you want to take a look at that. But we also have an excellent blog post on, obviously, the orbs geared at iris recognition. We have a blog post on iris recognition inference system, pretty technical, but it talks about why the iris, and it talks about what's called the entropy, or the kind of the randomness or uniqueness in a given iris that allows us to scale and not solve deduplication necessarily from a many to one kind of reference or one to many, but at global scale. Okay, let me look at next question. We've got that one. So another question is, when will verification using orbs be back in Kenya? So you want to take that one?
For sure. First of all, thank you for so many people reaching out to me personally. I think a couple of people also reached out to Sam, probably much more, just given his following, from Kenyans that are really sad that we are not there anymore and want us to be back, or want Worldcoin to be back. We work with the government and all the regulators and answer all the questions they have, but fundamentally, this is not in our control. That's where we are.
Okay, very good. Yeah, so let's see. Another question came in. Yeah, so this almost goes back to a little. It's a fair question. It says if you use and therefore need to store a hash of my iris data for uniqueness, how can I be sure sensitive intel on things could be deduced from that and linked to your personal wallet? I can answer actually part of that. So I think it's a little bit of a misconception. So what we have as a result of scanning an iris is something called an iris code, which by the way is also referenced in that last blog post I mentioned on the system. We store an iris code, which is a digital representation of the randomness in your iris. And that's just used for comparative purposes to see, have you signed up before, basically, is what we're after there. So there's nothing about it that has any form of what you might get like from DNA, like being able to analyze genes or whatever, certain things that might be present in DNA. It is literally just a binary string we can use to do comparisons. So that's one thing there. There's nothing in that could indicate any kind of character trait. Secondly, even that is not linked in any way to like your quote online persona or your wallet. And in fact, we've done the exact opposite. We went to great lengths to make sure there is no linkage. So yeah, great question. And yeah, hope that addressed it. Let's see. I think we're actually a little over time, but that's okay because it's been a great conversation. First of all, I want to thank everyone that joined us today on the space. As always, we record these so they'll be available after the fact. Special thanks to Alex and Tiago for coming on and providing some insight into the project and the launch and the run up to launch and a little bit about what's next. Yeah, everyone, really appreciate your time. So have a great rest of the day and we'll have another space soon, I'm sure, on a different topic.